But the goal was not really to help out students, because the terms of the loan remained the same. You know, with interest rates that are up around 8%, from 4 to 7 to 8%. If you think about what the federal prime rate right now is, what's the federal prime rate?
Is it 4? 3.8 or 4%?
Much lower than that.
Oh.
Much lower than that. And if you think about what the rate for home equity loans are, you know, around about 4%, why are student loans running at 7 or 8%? The government also profits from the defaults. The government massively profits from the defaults, and these are defaults, again, on inflated loans. The third factor is the complicity of universities themselves. They profit from the loan system in many ways. Some of that has been actually investigated, but much of it has not. And of course, they've raised tuition prices to criminally high levels. The cost of higher education is the only price that has kept on rising through the Great Recession. It's the only price that has kept on rising. That should tell you that this is this is a symptom of a speculative bubble, right? Even in a recession, the cost of something keeps on rising. And I can assure you that faculty and staff are not beneficiaries of the rising costs. In fact, in the time I've been teaching at NYU in 18 years, I've never seen a faculty raise at NYU that came close to matching the rise in the cost of living in New York City. In that same period of time, or at least since he took office, the current president of my university, his salary has doubled, and when he retires, he's guaranteed $800,000 a year as a retirement pension. This puts us up there, you know, in the sort of stratospheric CEO type levels of compensation. So what is to be done? Chronic underemployment means that default rates are already rising quite rapidly. The last government estimates of defaults were still in the single figures for 2009. They were up around 9%, but they've surely risen since then. However, other independent estimates, Alan Collins, who runs something called studentloanjustice.org, which you can visit, he estimates that up to a third of all student loans are currently defaulting. Up to a third of all student loans are defaulting. So mass default is already occurring, but it's not occurring en masse. It's occurring individually, on an individual basis. It's not experienced en masse. The carriers of unpayable debt suffer in isolation as individuals. And there's a lot of shame and humiliation, a lot of depression. Depression is very common as a consequence of this kind of debt. Divorce and suicide are likely outcomes of that kind of depression. So are the conditions ripe for a collective default? This is one of the questions that was posed to announce this forum. Maybe not yet, but if debtors were to unite publicly and threaten to default en masse, then things might change quite rapidly. Just as we derive power from the threat to withdraw our labor in a strike, so too we exercise a lot of collective power through the threat of a rent or a debt strike. The cause is a very popular one. The arguments for a radical overhaul of the system have never been more urgent, more timely. The cause for debt abolition has never been more urgent. Nor is this a marginal sector of the economy. It's the largest pool of debt, almost $1 trillion. And for bankers, it's the most advantageous of all. And for me at least, the most scandalous aspect of this situation is that education is the vehicle for delivering this exorbitant profit. Education is a vehicle for generating this massive debt. Of all things, education should not be a source of profit for anyone, let alone the source of the most extortionate forms of rent extraction in our society. Public education should be free. Free education at elementary and secondary level should be extended to the tertiary level of education. Many other countries do this. The US is a glaring exception. So, there's been a lot of talk about student debt around Occupy Wall Street, and it's sort of taken for granted that it's one of the issues that we're concerned with. Maybe it's time that we needed an action initiative. So what I'd like to propose today, and I'm floating this for this audience to see what you think about it. What I'm proposing is a pledge of refusal. A pledge of refusal, which would be a national pledge. Signatories will pledge to stop their payments once a certain number of other signatories have joined in with the pledge. We could set a very large number, 1 million. There will be strength in unity, and as the numbers mount, it will have a public and political impact. The pledge would be based on a call for free public education at the tertiary level, and it would call for the abolition of student debt. Not the reform of student debts, but the abolition of student debts. If we believe that education is not a commodity, we should not treat student loans as if they were like any other kind of consumer loan. And government policy making operates within the very narrow confines of making small adjustments to what it regards as a consumer loan. I did a very rough draft of a pledge, and I wanted to share it with you. It's called the Pledge of Refusal. This sounds very active. And it goes like this. Public education is more and more financed through student debt. Even in times of fuller employment, the system is morally unsustainable. Now, with chronic underemployment likely for decades to come, the most indebted generation in history will carry an intolerable burden into the future. The time has come to refuse this debt load. Education is not a commodity. It should not be a vehicle for generating debt or profit. Public education at the tertiary level should be publicly funded. Student loans should be abolished. Many other countries support tuition-free university systems. The US should join that list. As part of a national unity campaign to abolish student debt, I pledge to stop making loan payments after 1 million others have signed this pledge. It's a very rough draft, and I'm floating it here for the first time. Vicente mentioned that Silvia Federici and George Cafensis will be speaking later in this week, and they'll be building on a discussion of this idea and further floating it. But we wanted to reality test it this evening for the first time. And of course our discussion should not be limited to that, because everyone has different angles on this topic and everyone has different ideas. So, Vicente, can you moderate?